We just hit July, and you know what that means? That means that we are in the last month. Yeah, that is right, the last month without college football. Guys, what is going on? Welcome to Touchdowns to Home Runs. We've already done our Big 12 predictions here on this channel, and that means that next up is the Big 10. Cannot wait to break down my predictions in the Big 10 for you guys. It is going to be an amazing video because the Big 10, we know it's one of the better conferences in all of college football, but there are a lot of interesting teams and interesting scenarios that are going to happen this year in the Big 10. So, guys, first of all, if you aren't already subscribed and you love college football, I guarantee you this is the channel for you. So hit that sub button, and while you're at it, hit that like button. It really helps me out. And without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy this video because it is going to be a long one. Before we start this video, I just want to kick off with some ground rules. I feel like I'm back in umpiring where I'd have to call each coach in and do the whole plate meeting. My umpiring days are long over, but it's not that much. It's just the format of the video and everything that I want you guys to understand. And another thing is, obviously, first thing, I'm wearing a Penn State hat. That doesn't mean I'm a Penn State fan. I love collecting merchandise from all different college teams. So when I do a video like this talking about the Big 10, which is going to feature Penn State, I can wear a hat that kind of relates to it. So I love doing that. It doesn't mean that I'm going to be biased in this video. It doesn't mean that I'm a Penn State fan and everything like that. Last year in my Big 10 predictions, I wore a Penn State hat and an Ohio State shirt. People were not happy about that, so I just went neutral this time and just put on my Chicago Bears jersey. And then the second thing is I just want to talk about the format of this video and how it's going to work and everything. If you watched my Big 12 predictions, you would have seen that I just ranked the teams 10-1. Now, there is a reason I did that. That is because the Big 12 does not have divisions. They are just all one big conference. They all play each other, and they do not have divisions. Now, how I'm going to do this one and how I'm going to do my SEC one is I'm going to do each team in each division. So we're going to start off with, I'm going to give you my 7th team in the Big 10 East, then I'm going to give you my 7th team in the Big 10 West, then I'm going to go my 6th team in the Big 10 East, then my 6th team in the Big 10 West, and then going all the way up till we hit the 2 number 1 teams. So that is how the format of this video is going to work. I'm not going to do 14-1. I'm going division by division, predicting how the Big 10 standings will end up at the end of the season. Like I just said, we are going to start off with my number 7 team in the Big 10 East, and that team I have the Michigan State Spartans. Now, guys, we could talk all you want about your individual stats, maybe even some of the team stats, but the most important stat, if you want to talk about in a wins and losses category, is how much is your team able to score and how well are you able to stop the other team from scoring? And nobody did it worse than the Michigan State Spartans last season, finishing dead last in both scoring offense and scoring defense. So Michigan State has a lot of work to do. This offense, starting off with the offense, this offense only put up around 18 points per game last season. Obviously, Mel Tucker and Jay Johnson have a lot to work on there. Starting off with the passing game, Rocky Lombardi exits. You're going to have Anthony Russo come in senior as your quarterback, and good thing for him is his 2 leading receivers from last season both return, as you have Reed and Naylor both coming back. They're going to be the main targets for Michigan State next season. You got to really work on getting the ball in their hands because the rushing game last season, moving on to that, was no strength for them at all. This rushing game wasn't even able to put up average over 100 yards per game. Someone is going to have to break out in that running back room if you want Michigan State to have a successful season this year. And if I look at any guy on Michigan State, I'm probably leaning towards your Kenneth Walker III to be that guy. And lucky for him, 5 of 5 starters return to this offensive line. So you are going to have some talent on the O-line and some experience on the O-line to be able to kickstart some running game, because that's a huge piece that Michigan State is going to have to pick up if they want to be successful this season offensively. Moving on to the defense. Defensively, again, I just said it, this team was dead last in scoring defense. This defense gave up around 35 points per game last season. Obviously, scoring 18 points per game and giving up 35 points per game is not going to get you very many wins. So losing Brown, Simmons, and Jones is going to be huge. It's going to leave a bunch of holes in this Michigan State defense. Now, if I look at some guys to really step up this year, you're obviously looking at Jacob Panashuk being the guy off the edge. He's going to really anchor that position and getting to the quarterback and everything like that. I think the linebacking core is going to be a pretty big question mark for Michigan State this season. You got a lot to still figure out there. The secondary, I think, will be decent. You're obviously going to have Gervin and Henderson be the 2 main guys there, but overall, you look at Michigan State, I just don't know how I put them anywhere higher than 7 with the guys that they lost and even with the guys they had last season, I mean, this team still finished dead last in scoring offense and dead last in scoring defense. I don't want to make this whole video about those two stats, but I mean, they're two pretty big stats. So that is why I have Michigan State as my number 7 team in the Big Ten East. Coming in at my number 7 spot in the Big Ten West, I have the Illinois Fighting Illini. Now, I know I just talked about it a lot with Michigan State in this scoring offense and scoring defense, and even though I don't want to really focus this video around that, I can't ignore it. I just can't ignore it for these two bottom teams because you have Illinois finishing 13th in the Big Ten in both scoring offense and scoring defense. We could talk stats all you want. We could do all of that, but stats aren't points. Points win you games. Stats don't win you games. So really focusing on that, like, you can't win ball games if you're not able to score and everything. Now, this Illinois offense is very, I'd say, one-dimensional because you have the worst passing offense in all of the Big Ten last season. Obviously, Brandon Peters is coming back, being the quarterback this season, most likely. But maybe if you really want to single in on this rushing game, might like to see Isaiah Williams get in because he was a huge piece in the rushing game for Illinois last season. A dual-threat quarterback, if you kind of want to change the identity of this offense, maybe throw him in there. That's going to be something that I'm going to be looking for Illinois this season. I still think Brandon Peters is going to be the guy, but just something to keep in the back of your head. Now, I said the passing game was the worst in all of the Big Ten last season, and that is not going to help with the exit of Josh Imatorbhebhe going all the way to USC. So you're going to have a guy like, my guess is Hightower is going to have to be the guy at Illinois to really, really step up and make something of this passing game. Now, the rushing game is the complete opposite. I already talked about a bit about Isaiah Williams, obviously being a big dual-threat quarterback, but what about Chase Brown? Chase Brown had an amazing season last year. This rushing game as a whole almost rushed for 200 yards per game, was one of the better rushing games in all of the Big Ten. So a huge positive there, and they returned 4 of 5 O-linemen to this O-line. Tons of experience coming back. Now, defensively, the Fighting Illini absolutely got run over last season. They gave up somewhere towards 230 yards per game on the ground. Obviously not good there. If you look at some guy to lead this defense, you're going to look at Jake Hansen, obviously a guy who's going to be in the running for the Dick Butkus Award, but just this team defensively, there's so many inconsistencies. They're just towards the bottom of the Big Ten defensively. So I don't know about that combined with the passing offense and everything like that. You're kind of a one-dimensional team. Teams are going to be able to easily figure you out that you are a running team. So for that reason, I just don't see how I can put Illinois above some of the other teams that I have in the Big Ten West. Coming in at my number 6 spot in the Big Ten East, I have the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Now, before we even start talking about this season, let's talk about last season because even though Rutgers only went 3-6, this team made a lot of progress and showed a lot of progress. They started off the season with a big win against Michigan State. They beat Purdue, they beat Maryland, and then they play some close games against pretty good opponents. You look at Ohio State, they actually had them pretty close in that game. They forced Michigan to overtime. So I think a lot of progress has been made in this Rutgers football program. Now, going on to this season, why I have them at 6 and everything, this team, they did decent offensively. They put up around 26, 27 points per game. Now, a positive for Rutgers going into this season is that they return all 11 starters on offense. Obviously, any year that you could do that is going to be huge for you. I think this passing game is probably the main focal point of this offense, more so than the rushing game, which we're going to get into in a second. Noah Vedral is going to be the guy at the quarterback position for Rutgers, and him passing the ball, he's going to have his main target to be Bo Melton, 110%. Isaiah Pacheco also returns, their leading rusher, which is huge for them. The rushing game could get kickstarted a bit more because this was a rushing game that finished 10th in the Big Ten. So I think if Rutgers wants to be successful, they're going to have to get the rushing game going a bit more. But again, they return all their offensive linemen. They return their starting running back, their leading running back. They return their starting quarterback, all their wide receivers, everything like that. So I think your experience and just this team knowing what they're doing on the field is going to be huge for Rutgers this season. Defensively, it was a struggle. This team gave up around 32 points per game, which is obviously not good. If any unit is a strength for Rutgers on this team, it is definitely the linebacking core. Got a lot of experience back there. But overall, you just look at this team defensively last season, towards the bottom in scoring defense, towards the bottom in passing defense, towards the bottom in rushing defense, and overall defense. They were just towards the bottom, giving up a lot of yards per game and everything like that. So for those reasons, even though you do return a lot of experience back on your offense, and I do think that they will have some success offensively, I just don't know if this Rutgers team is ready to stop the ball from going inside their own end zone. So for that reason, I am putting putting Rutgers as my 6th team in the Big Ten East. Coming in at my number 6 spot in the Big Ten West, I have the Purdue Boilermakers. Now, Purdue last season actually started out the season pretty good with a big win versus Iowa, and then they traveled to Illinois and also picked up a win there. So they start off the season 2-0, although they did lose their next 4 games, finishing out the season 2-4. Obviously, that is not a good spot for Purdue. But, I mean, we just talked about one-dimensional offenses with Illinois, and I don't think anyone fits a better description of one-dimensional than the Purdue Boilermakers. Let's start off with the negative and then go towards the positive so we can finish up on a lighter note. First of all, the negative for Purdue, the rushing game. The rushing game finished dead last in the Big Ten last season, only averaging around 81.5 yards per game on the ground for Purdue. Obviously, that's not a good spot that you want to be in, and it gets even worse because 3 of 5 of your starting O-linemen do leave this O-line for Purdue. So the rushing game, you do return Xander Horvath, who is your leading rusher from last season, but overall, Purdue's rushing game has got to get better in some sense. And now let's go on to the strength of this team, because the strength of this offense is the passing game. And this passing game finished number 1 in the Big Ten last season. I mean, quarterback-wise, I don't know who's going to be the starter right now. You have 2 great guys in Jack Plummer and Aiden O'Connell. And yes, you do lose one of the better wide receivers in the NFL draft in Rondale Moore, but you return David Bell, who is one of the best receivers in all of the Big Ten this season. So I think the passing game will be just as good as it was last season. So a lot to look forward to on the passing game for Purdue, but the rushing game still needs a lot of work to be done. Defensively for this team, obviously, I think you have one of the better players in all the Big Ten, maybe even the country on the edge. George Karlaftis is obviously probably going to earn some All-American honors this year. He is one of the better players in the Big Ten, so excited to see what he can do off the edge. But for the rest of this team, especially looking at the linebacking core after the loss of Derek Barnes last season, I don't know how this team is going to perform. I see a lot of holes in this Purdue linebacking core especially, and maybe even in the secondary a bit. A lot of people see them as one of the bottom defenses on all the Big Ten, and for those reasons, I just don't know why I can put Purdue as a top 5 team in the Big Ten West, because yes, their passing game is really good, but the rushing game has been a huge struggle for them, and then defensively, I think they got still a lot to work on. So for those reasons, I am putting the Purdue Boilermakers at number 6 in the Big Ten West. Kicking off my number 5 slots in the Big Ten East, starting off, we have the Maryland Terrapins. Now, the Terps last season did go 2-3. They had 2 big wins, one against Minnesota in overtime and then one against Penn State. They did drop a game pretty sizably to Northwestern, and then they also had losses to Indiana and Rutgers. But other than that, I thought you showed a lot of promise with Maryland last season, and who else to talk about except quarterback Taulia Tagovailoa, obviously brother of Tua Tagovailoa, Miami Dolphins quarterback, and ex-Alabama Crimson Tide quarterback. Taulia transferred from Alabama, where he was with his brother, over to Maryland, and showed what he could be all about this season. Especially, he had an amazing game and one of the better passing games in all the Big Ten. I think this offense was throwing the ball around for around 265 yards per game with Maryland. So a good thing for Taulia as well. All of his top leading receivers returned to this offense. So I think the passing game is going to be right where it left off for Maryland this season. Now the rushing game, I think, is going to take a bit of a hit. I think Fleet Davis is going to be the main guy there. You do lose 2 of your offensive linemen, and you obviously lose Jake Funk, who was your leading rusher last season. So I think the rushing game, which wasn't really a strength of this offense, I don't want to say it was a whole weakness in the Big Ten, because they weren't towards in that like bottom 3, but they weren't in the top half of Big Ten offenses in rushing 110%. Now, taking a look at this team defensively, this team gave up around 32 points per game. Obviously, you want to be a bit lower than that. The defense is going to be a bit of a struggle. I think the passing defense is going to be right where it left off last season. They had a huge season last year. You're going to look at a guy as a leader. Nick Cross, obviously free safety. He's going to be one of your main key guys on this Maryland team. But you look at the rushing defense, giving up over 230 rushing yards a game. That has got to pick up somewhere. Like, they had one of the worst rushing defenses in the Big Ten last season, so that's obviously going to have to pick up. Why I put Maryland at 5? I really want to put this team higher. I think this is a fun, exciting team to cheer for, obviously, because you have a star's brother at quarterback, and that's always exciting. But I think this team is just a team that is on the rise and a team that's fun to look out for. Why I have them at 5 is just defensively, I don't know if they're there yet, especially getting run all over last season. And then I don't want to say this team is too one-dimensional. I just think that they obviously have a clear strength on their offensive side of the ball, which might be a bit easier to pick out if you are another team. And I just have 4 better teams right now in the Big Ten East, but I think this Maryland team is definitely on the rise. So for those reasons, I have the Maryland Terrapins at number 5 in the Big Ten East. My number 5 team in the Big Ten West, I have the team that I always seem to pick high, the team that in the top 25 polls and the national attention and all that stuff always seem like it's their year and they're finally going to rise up to the occasion and get back to what this program used to be. I have the Nebraska Cornhuskers, and this season, I'm not picking them high. I'm just not doing it to myself. They can prove me wrong. They can do all they want to prove me wrong, and I won't complain at all, but I'm not going to pick this team high again this season. So Nebraska last season finished out the season 3-5. They had a win against Penn State. They had a win against Purdue, and they had a win against Rutgers, but lost, obviously, the rest of their 5 games. This team strength was definitely the rushing game last season, and their leading rusher, Adrian Martinez, who is also their quarterback, does return, so that is good for them. The bad news is your next 3 leading rushers, basically all your running back room is gone from last season. So that is going to be a huge point of concern for Nebraska this season. Since the rushing game was so strong last year, you can't just have Adrian Martinez do everything on the ground because that will get a bit too predictable. And also because the passing game was definitely not a strength of this team at all. Finishing 12th in the Big Ten in overall passing offense last season, Adrian Martinez has got to step it up. And another thing that will suck for Cornhuskers is that Wan'Dale Robinson transferred to Kentucky, who is obviously your leading receiver at Nebraska, so that is going to hurt for them. I don't know where this offense is going to be at this season. I'm a bit worried about them, if I'm being honest, but they'll have to make do with what they got. Now, tuning into this defense, I actually think the defense is pretty well-rounded and solid. They returned 9 of 11 starters to this defense. I think that they're going to be really good. Although, a point of concern is they just got to get to the quarterback more, and I think they got to be more successful against the run if you want to see this Nebraska team really flourish defensively. Why I had them at 5, I know I just talked all good about their defense and everything. This team just wasn't able to score the ball last season. I think they put up somewhere around 23 points per game, and obviously being in the Big Ten, you got to be able to score more than that. This defense, I do think, will be able to put up sizable numbers this season. I just have no clue what this offense is going to be about. They lose a ton of talent that they had last season, and you're just returning a few starters. So Adrian Martinez, there's still lots of question marks about him because a couple seasons ago, this guy was like the Heisman favorite and a guy who was supposed to be a top 5 quarterback in the nation. He's just kind of disappeared. So this Nebraska team, I usually pick them high because it always seems like this is Nebraska's year and everything. Not falling for that this season. I am putting Nebraska at my number 5 spot in the Big Ten West. Now it is time to break down my 4th best team in the Big Ten East. And we are choosing one of the 2 teams in the Big Ten who had the most disappointing seasons last season. So let's do a coin flip to decide which one we're going to talk about. Let's see here. It is heads, which means we are going to talk about the Michigan Wolverines. Now, I have the Michigan Wolverines as my number 4 team in the Big Ten. Obviously, I just said it. Not only one of the most disappointing teams in the Big Ten, the other one, which we're going to talk about later, but in the country, the only team that I can see competing with Michigan to talk about one of the most disappointing seasons in all of college football is definitely the LSU Tigers. But Michigan, man, you talk about brands. Not only in college football, we already know that they're one of the biggest brands in college sports in general, but even in sports in general, the Michigan Wolverines are one of the most biggest brands in all of sports. And the fact that this program is just in the position they are in right now, where this team is going, 2-4 last season. Their only wins were against Minnesota the first game of the season, and then they have a win against Rutgers in overtime later in the season. Michigan's just in a really, really rough spot, especially this coaching staff and everything. I honestly, truly do feel bad for my partner on this channel, Bernie, big Michigan Wolverines fan. So if you're a Michigan fan and you love Michigan content, not only football, but basketball too, covers a lot of basketball, this is the channel for you. Hit that sub button. But I have Bernie, who's one of my good friends, Michigan fan, where I'm from up here in Toronto, Canada. If you are a college football fan, you are a Michigan Wolverines fan. So I got a lot of Michigan Wolverines fans all around me. I truly do feel bad for them because they're such a loyal fan base. They got such great history in their program and everything like that. And this program just sucks. They suck right now. And I know Michigan Wolverine fans can sympathize with each other in just saying that their program is pretty much in a bad spot right now. But let's talk about the good things about Michigan instead of just ranting about them. I should have brought on my partner Bernie on this channel to rant about Michigan. It would have made this video a lot better. But let's start off by talking about this offense. Their offense returns only 3 or 4 starters that they had last season. So it is going to be kind of starting from ground zero for this offense. But what you want to look at, especially offensively, if we want to talk about the positives, is the quarterback position. Now, over the past couple seasons, Michigan has been looking for that main quarterback, and not just a guy who's going to go out there and be average, but Michigan, if they want to get back to the level of football that they want to be at, the quarterback position is something that is absolutely key and something that they haven't hit on. A lot of people thought that Joe Milton was going to be the guy last year for Michigan. Obviously, that didn't turn out. Shea Patterson years before. Then you had guys like Brandon Peters. You had Spates. You had so many different guys that you could go on and name as quarterbacks for the Michigan Wolverines that just didn't work out. You have 2 decent guys in this quarterback room. First of all, Cade McNamara obviously was your leading passer last season. You saw a lot of him last year. And then incoming freshman from IMG Academy in Bradenton, Florida, obviously the most premier high school football program in all of the nation. You had their quarterback, J.J. McCarthy, coming in, who I know a lot of Michigan fans are feeling really, really high on. I don't know who's going to start this season. I'm guessing you're going to see Cade early on. And if things goes poorly there, you might see J.J. step onto the scene. So good thing for both of those quarterbacks is that their 2 leading receivers both return. Obviously, you're going to have Ronnie Bell, who is one of the most experienced guys on this Michigan team and definitely going to be one of the better players on this Michigan offense. And then you have Cornelius Johnson also as your second leading receiver for Michigan. So those 2 guys returning are going to be huge for this passing game. The rushing game, though, finished towards the bottom in the Big Ten. This rushing game was not anything stellar last season. Obviously, you have Zach Charbonnet go all the way back home to UCLA to go play for the Bruins next season. You still have Hassan Haskins as your main running back this season, but unlucky for him, 3 of 5 of your starting O-linemen from last season do leave. So offensively, I don't know where to call Michigan at. I think that this is going to be more of a passing-oriented offense, which they were last year. They mostly of Michigan's success last season was definitely in the passing game. So I'm looking at this being a more pass-oriented offense, but the rushing game has got to figure out something 110%. Now moving on to Michigan defensively. If we want to talk Michigan defensively, a positive straight off the bat, they returned 9 of 11 starters to this defense. Now, we could talk about how starters, returning experience is always a good thing, but is good experience a good thing? Because Michigan did allow 34.5 points per game last season in a defense that really, really struggled last season. So does returning starters mean anything? That's up to you to decide. But Michigan especially, I think their strength of this defense is obviously going to be the D-line. You're going to have Aiden Hutchinson as being that main guy on that D-line. Although Michigan's D-line and this defense as a whole really needs to step up in their rushing defense, as they allowed somewhere around 178 yards per game on the ground to the other team last season, which is obviously not good. And explosiveness on the defense was just something that was terrible for them last season, as they allowed so many 30-plus yard plays to the other teams. That's going to be a huge point of emphasis. They finished within the bottom 20 teams of explosive plays in all of the nation last year. So Michigan is going to have to clean that up, limit the explosive plays. And what I really feel about this Michigan team as a whole, it's not that they don't have talent. I think if anyone has the ability to step on to Michigan Stadium's field as a Michigan Wolverine in the maize and blue, you're going to have some kind of talent. It's not just a fluke that you end up here. Michigan is always going to have talent at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. It just all comes down to coaching. I honestly believe that it all comes down to coaching. And does Jim Harbaugh have this team in a good spot, in a coachable spot, to be able to have them as a top tier Big Ten East, or maybe even Big Ten in total team right now? I just don't feel that. So that is why I ultimately have Michigan landing at my number 4 spot in the Big Ten East. Does that mean that they aren't a talented team? No, I just don't know where this team as a whole is going to perform when they've had so much talent the recent past years and they just haven't been able to produce anything in total. So I have Michigan as my 4th team in the Big Ten East this season. We are officially halfway through my Big Ten predictions. I appreciate you guys for tuning in, and I have something special for you guys right now. Is I am doing my position unit draft for the Big Ten. So what I am doing here, let me explain this to you, is I have to pick a quarterback, a wide receiver unit, a running back unit, O-line unit, D-line unit, linebacker unit, and a DB unit, all 7 of those position groups from one team But the thing is, I am not allowed, so I'm trying to build the best team possible from the Big Ten, but I'm not allowed to pick a team more than once. So if I pick, let's say, Ohio State's running backs, I cannot pick Ohio State's DBs again. If I pick Indiana's defensive line, I cannot pick Indiana's O-line, if you get that. So how that means, and basically what I'm trying to do is build the best team possible out of the Big Ten units. So let's start that off. Starting off, I'll talk about my quarterback. My quarterback, I am taking Indiana's quarterback, obviously Michael Penix Jr. I think he's definitely a top 2 guy in all of the Big Ten for quarterbacks. Great dual threat guy. And if we're talking about units that we want to take, I think Indiana, this definitely their best player. So I am taking him at quarterback 110%. Wide receiver, easiest decision in the world. I'm taking Ohio State as they have the best wide receiver corps in all of college football. And this also includes tight end. So we have Garrett Wilson, we have Jackson Smith in Jigba, we have Chris Olave, we have Julian Fleming. Tons of great talent on this Ohio State wide receiving corps. So easy choice, 110%. Running back room, I am going with Minnesota's, obviously highlighting Mohamed Ibrahim as the main guy there. O-line, I'm taking Penn State's. D-line, I'm going Michigan, so I'm going with like Aiden Hutchinson, all those guys that they got over there in Michigan. Linebackers, I'm going with Wisconsin. Obviously, you're looking at Jake Sanborn, you're looking at Noah Burks, all those guys in company. And then DBs, I'm going with Iowa's DB group, Matt Haskins, Jack Corner, all those guys. So that is my all Big Ten team position unit draft, if that's what you want to call it. I'm definitely going to do this for the SEC because this is actually fun for me to decide, because it's hard, because obviously Ohio State has some of the best position units in all of not only the Big Ten, but on all of college football, but I can only pick them once. So I had to take the wide receiver group because I think that they're the best, and it's just fun to mix and match and choose strategically which unit can I only take once. If I have to only take one thing from Penn State, if I only have to take one thing from Iowa, one thing from Indiana, all these different teams, it provides a really, really interesting thing that really broke my brain down. But that is what I finished up with. QB, Indiana, wide receiver, Ohio State, running back, Minnesota, O-line, Penn State, D-line, Michigan, linebacker, Wisconsin, and DB, Iowa. Getting back now to my predictions, we are now at the 4th team in the Big Ten West, and the 4th team I have in the Big Ten West, I have the Minnesota Golden Gophers. Now, Minnesota was my favorite to win the Big Ten West last season. I picked them in my 2020 predictions to finish out first in the Big Ten West, and that obviously didn't happen because Minnesota went 3-4 and finished out the season as 4th in the Big Ten West. Now, their wins were against Illinois, Purdue, and Nebraska. Not really any highlight wins there. Those teams all finished towards the bottom of the Big Ten and in the Big Ten West because all their wins were from the Big Ten West. So nothing really impressive there. Now, looking at this team, you obviously know that this team's strength, especially offensively, is going to be the ground game. Obviously, Mohamed Ibrahim is going to be one of the best guys in all of college football at the running back position. You're going to have him. What really concerns me about this Minnesota offense is the passing game. Obviously, you're still going to have Tanner Morgan, who's going to be one of the more experienced guys, definitely in the Big Ten, and one of the better guys at quarterback in the Big Ten, but you lose Rashad Bateman, and obviously we could talk about how good he was, how good Tyler Johnson was a couple years ago for Minnesota, and after that, you're going to have Ottman Bell, who is still a really, really good guy for Minnesota. He comes back this season, but after that, there was a huge drop-off in the passing game, which finished in the second half of the Big Ten. This team couldn't even throw for 200 yards per game. They finished with like 199 yards per game. I know that's being a bit picky, but still, it's under 200. They finished in the bottom half of the Big Ten in total passing offense. That worries me this season, and that is my main concern for Minnesota this season. Although they do return a lot of experience. I think they return 9 or 10 starters to this offense, so you're going to have experience, but losing Rashad Bateman is going to be key, and just who on this wide receiver core is going to step up. A lot of people feel really good about Daniel Jackson, a guy who I'm pretty sure was a freshman last year. A lot of people think he's going to be the next guy, but I'm really concerned about this wide receiver core, and that's why I have them so low right now. Talking about this defense, defensively, the secondary has been the strength of Minnesota the last couple seasons. Obviously, you're going to look at guys like Antoine Winfield Jr. going back a couple seasons. Obviously, had an amazing season with the Buccaneers this season, obviously won a Super Bowl and everything like that. You lose a guy in Benjamin St-Juste who was one of their better guys at corner the last couple seasons. I'm starting to worry about the secondary. And more about the secondary. The secondary was their strength. I think it still will be the strength of this defense. I just don't think it will be as good as it was in seasons prior. And the main point of concern on this defense is the defensive front, and more specifically stopping the run, as this team allowed over 200 rushing yards per game, and they allowed over 30 points per game. Minnesota is such a tough team to size up for me because there's a lot of good things that I think are positives for Minnesota right now in this program and things that are going well, but there's also some negatives, and outweighing those two things, picking them over teams like your Northwesterns, your Iowas, and your Wisconsins right now, I just don't realistically see it. And that's not to say that I don't think Minnesota is not going to be a good team this year. It's just for those reasons. The passing game, I think, is going to take a step back, even though I do think the rushing game will still be as effective as it was last year. The defense is really concerning me, and their ability to stop the rushing game and losing some key guys in the secondary. I think that Minnesota is ultimately going to stay put at where they were last season and finish out fourth in the Big Ten West. Coming in at my number 3 spot in the Big Ten East, and this is where the so-called controversy starts, or this is really the spot that you're going to be looking at, because you really came to see this video not to see who number 1 was in the Big Ten East. You came to see who was my number 2 team in the Big Ten East. So you're pretty much going to find that out here, because my number 3 team, I have the team on my hat. I have Penn State. Now, Penn State last season started out the season horrible. I think it's easy to say that they were, in the beginning of the season, we can all say that they were one of the most disappointing teams in all of college football. Obviously, I talked about that when I was talking about them and Michigan, when I was talking about Michigan being like, oh, there's another team in the Big Ten East that was disappointing this season. Penn State did, though, after those 5 losses, win their next 4 games, and they are currently on a 4-game winning streak. And I think you can attribute a lot to their losses and everything, to COVID and injuries and all this kind of stuff. Penn State got hit hard last season, and it is immature of me and unprofessional of me to not be able to be aware of that and everything that Penn State went through and just come out and say, well, Penn State was supposed to be one of the best teams in the nation, and they went 4-5. So Penn State this season, I think, has one of the best abilities in all of college football to flip the script. Them and LSU especially are up there for the teams that can be like flipping the script, in terms of they had a pretty bad season last year. Both teams had 5 losses, and they could flip the script and both get into double-digit wins pretty easily. But why do I have Penn State at 3? Before I get into why I have them at number 3, we got to talk about this offense and everything like that. Obviously, you're going to have Sean Clifford back at quarterback for Penn State. Going to be huge there. The receiving core for Penn State's going to be one of the best in the Big Ten. Obviously, you're going to have Jahan Dotson, who is one of the best guys not only in the Big Ten but in the country. Then also you're going to have Lambert Smith, and you're also going to have Washington there. So I think the wide receiver core is going to be great. The running back room, I think, is also going to be great. Obviously, Noah Cain is coming back, which is going to be huge for them. I think he's really going to anchor this running game, and Penn State should have a overall very, very solid offense. Now, defensively, I think that they have one of the better secondaries in all of the Big Ten. I'm really confident in this Penn State secondary. Obviously, you look at a guy like Brisker really being one of the better guys there. But then you look at the front 7 is going to be where it really, really stings, as they only have 1 returning starter on that front 7, and them against the rushing game was a bit of a concern last year. So I think that is my only concern with this Penn State team, just really this front 7 and how they do against the rushing game, because they're going to be young and inexperienced. They don't have a lot of starters coming back. But overall, this Penn State team has the capability to do something really, really good and really, really special. So why do I have them at my number 3 spot? I think this team still has one of the hardest away schedules in the Big Ten, and you compare that to some of the other teams that you have in the Big Ten East, and more so, you have to play every team in the Big Ten East. That's a bottom line thing. But you look at the cross-divisional games, Penn State has to go to Wisconsin, their first game of the season, which is going to be a tough one of the more premier games in that week 1. They got to go to Iowa. They got to go to Ohio State as well. They got to go to Maryland. So they have a really, really tough road schedule. They do get in the cross-divisional. They do get Illinois at home, which is obviously going to be a pretty easy win for them. You do play Michigan at home, which is going to be good. You do play Indiana at home. But to say that this is a team that could go flawless this season, I think is a bit of an overstatement. And as much as I'd love to see Penn State do well this season, it's not that I think Penn State's bad. It's not that I think that this team won't have so much better of a season than last year. It's just that I have one other team that I think is just in that win now mode, ready to win now before Penn State takes that next step. And I think in that 2022 season is when you're going to really see Penn State flourish. But for now, I have Penn State as my third team in the Big Ten East. A bit of a shocker pick there, but it's my picks. I have them at number 3. Now let's break down my number 3 team in the Big Ten West. I have the Northwestern Wildcats, who are the defending champions of the Big Ten West. Let's flash back to last season. Let's say Northwestern is able to win that game against Michigan State and then keep the game close against Ohio State and pull out with a win there. This is a playoff team. Like, that is literally how close Northwestern was to being a playoff team last season. They were that good. Just no one talks about it. I think a lot of that is accredited to not only the players and how well this team did defensively and everything like that, but the coaching staff of this team, I think, is one of the best of the country, and it's all due to Pat Fitzgerald, who's obviously one of the best coaches in the country, I think, or at least in my opinion. What he's able to do at Northwestern year in and year out, get them to Indianapolis multiple times, I think it's really, really special what he's done. So kudos to him. I think this Northwestern team is still going to be really, really good this season. Now, let's start off talking about them offensively. Offensively, there's a huge turnover. The only thing that they return is they return 3 of 5 offensive linemen. The rest they're starting fresh from. Peyton Ramsey obviously leaves at quarterback, but that opens up a huge opportunity for a transfer from South Carolina, obviously my favorite team, Ryan Hilinski. And I really feel like last year, especially watching that Big Ten championship game, it seemed like Northwestern was a quarterback away from doing something really, really special. And I think Ryan Hilinski is that guy. Like, if we want to talk arm talent, accuracy, and all things like that, Ryan Hilinski is that guy who can hit the ball downfield really, really accurately. In that couple seasons that I saw him at South Carolina, unbelievable things to be said there. Is just some things happened at South Carolina, and he ended up transferring. So Northwestern is actually coming in with a very, very good look at quarterback this season. I'm excited to see what they're able to do there. Hit a guy like J.J. Jefferson. He's probably going to be the main receiver, at least in my opinion, for Northwestern this season. And then looking at the running back game, good thing is you do return your leading rusher in Cam Porter. You return most of your offensive line, even though there's a huge turnover overall offensively for Northwestern. So I think this offense is going to do decent this year. Now taking a look at this team defensively, and we all know this was Northwestern's strength last season. They finished 5th overall in the nation in scoring defense, only allowing 15.9 points per game. Now, they did lose some talent. As much turnover as there was on the offense, there was some turnover on the defense as well, as Northwestern lost big guys like Patty Fisher. You look at guys like Greg Newsome. It'll be hard to rebuild, but I think the secondary especially, that's what Northwestern's really, really good at. You got a guy like Brandon Joseph still back there at safety for Northwestern. I think the defense, even though they lost so much talent, I honestly believe that they're going to stay around the same as being one of the more premier defenses in the Big Ten. They do bring in a new coach in Coach O'Neill to defensive coordinate this team, but I think Northwestern is just a team that is coached so well. I'll preach it day in and day out that Northwestern is one of the best coached teams, and honestly, it doesn't matter who you really put in that defense as long as you got that coaching staff there. I think they're going to be really, really successful. So I think Northwestern is going to have a really, really good season. They're going to get better offensively. I think defensively you might see take a bit of a step back because they do lose some good guys, but overall I think they're going to be still good on both sides of the ball. So overall I have them as my 3rd team in the Big Ten West. Now let's move on to my number 2 team in the Big Ten East. So I'm the guy who on YouTube and everything talking about college football, it takes me a while to adapt to basketball programs being good at football. So it took me a while to Kentucky. Kentucky fans on this channel definitely know that I'm a bit harsh on them. North Carolina took me a while to. You could talk about Duke when they're good the odd time. Like schools like that, basketball schools like that, when they are good at football, it takes me time to adjust. So me putting Indiana, who I see as a basketball school, this high in the Big Ten is saying a lot about how I feel about this team this year. First off, let's talk about the offense. Let's talk about Indiana, how they did last year. Went 6-2, and even in their 2 losses, which were to Ohio State and Ole Miss, 2 of the better teams in all of college football, in my opinion, they lose 1-score games. They lose 42-35 against Ohio State, and then they lose 26-20 against Ole Miss. And first of all, holding Ole Miss to 26 points is a miracle in itself. So that shows a lot about how good this Indiana defense could be this season. But let's take a look at the offense, and I think the guy that really makes this Indiana team is obviously Michael Penix Jr., the guy at the quarterback position. Had an amazing season last year, threw for 14 touchdowns, only 4 interceptions. I think we'll have an amazing season this year, obviously pairing up with Ty Freifogel, who is their leading receiver, caught for over 700 yards last season. I think those two guys are going to pair up and be amazing this season. The running back position could use a bit of work. They were towards the bottom in the Big Ten in rushing last year. They're going to look to guys like Tim Baldwin and James Sampson to be those two big guys in the running back game. But other than that, I think the passing game will definitely be Indiana's main threat and be their main point of success offensively. Now moving on to defense. Oh, by the way, offensively, I forgot to add this. 8 of 11 starters return on this offense. So just another thing. It's not just that you're returning any experience, you're returning good experience who performed well last season. Now let's move on to the defense, who the defense as well returns 9 of 11 starters. So as a whole, this Indiana team that went 6-2 last season is getting 17 of 22 guys back. Lots to look forward to there. Defensively, this team only gave up around 20 points per game last season. Absolutely huge for them. Again, you look at the teams that were most successful last year. A team like Northwestern had the least amount of points scored against them in the Big Ten. They go to Indianapolis. If Indiana is able to keep that up defensively, especially against a team like Ohio State, they did allow them to put up 42 points on them. If they're able to limit that to only 30, I think this Indiana has a pretty good chance to go out there and score 30 plus on Ohio State. Now that Ohio State game is still a far way away and still lots of work to be done for Indiana to compete with Ohio State, but the possibility is there. So all in all, why I have this Indiana team over Penn State, I think that Indiana's just in a win now mode. I think they got some really good experience. That's not to trash talk the talent and everything that they have over there in Penn State, because I think I would not be shocked if Penn State comes second in this division, maybe even first. I would be a bit shocked that Ohio State didn't, but Penn State is seriously that good this season. But I really feel strongly about the returning experience that Indiana has coming back to Indiana this season. I think they're going to be a really, really successful team. Excited to see what Michael Penix Jr. is able to do, and excited to see what this team is able to do as a whole. So that is the reason I have Indiana at my number 2 spot in the Big Ten East. Moving on to our last team before we get into our 2 number 1s in the Big Ten in each division. In the Big Ten West, my number 2 team is going to be the Iowa Hawkeyes. Now, I think that this race is extremely close between them and Wisconsin. Could go either way, but I do have Iowa as my number 2 team. Let's highlight some things from last season for Iowa. This team goes 6-2, starts off the season with 2 losses, a 4-point loss to Purdue to start it off, and then a 3-point loss to Northwestern to follow up, and then they go into this season on a 6-game winning streak. Huge, finishing off the season with a 6-game winning streak. And just looking at how Iowa comes in this season, I think the passing game is going to be the weakness of this offense. Obviously, you're going to have Petrus coming in as your quarterback this season as well. They lose their leading receiver in Smith Marset. I don't think that the receiving game is going to be a focal point of this offense. If anything it's going to be the rushing game. We all know Iowa is quote-unquote offensive line use, so they're always going to have great offensive linemen in Iowa, and to match that up with an amazing running back in Tyler Goodson. Rushed for over 700 yards last season. He's going to come back in one of the most successful rushing games in the Big Ten last season, so I think Iowa is looking really, really good. Offensively, this team was able to put up 31.8 points per game in the Big Ten last season, and that attributed to be the second best scoring offense in the Big Ten last season. So lots of good stuff to look forward to for Iowa offensively. Now defensively, I think it gets even better, because Iowa defensively only allowed 16 points per game last season. That is finishing second in the Big Ten, and by the slim margin of 0.1 of a point. Finishing second would have come first if Northwestern obviously didn't have 15.9 points per game. So one of the best defenses in the Big Ten last season, and I think nothing changes. Obviously, I think that you're going to have to do some filling up to do when you have Golston and Nixon both leaving this defensive line. I think the defensive front is still going to be fine, but obviously losing those 2 guys is going to be huge for you. But I think the secondary, this returns to be one of the best secondaries, not only in the Big Ten, but in the nation. I look at a lot of guys like around here, like corner. You're going to have guys like Haskins also being there for Iowa. Lots of good players to be said about on this secondary. So as a whole, I think Iowa's going to be a very, very good team. You look at the scoring, again, I marked this down at the beginning of the video talking about your Michigan States, your Illinois. If you're not able to score yourself, and if you're not able to stop the other team from scoring, you're not going to be that successful. Iowa has done both of those teams last season. Let's just attribute that and convert that to this season, and I think Iowa's going to have a very successful season. But all in all, I just have Wisconsin as slightly better than Iowa this season, but I still think Iowa's going to have a very good season, finishing up at number 2 in the Big Ten West. Now coming up at my number one spot in the Big Ten East, there was never any doubt, the Ohio State Buckeyes. I think there's arguments and a lot to point out and compare them to in a national scale in terms of teams that are close to them and everything like that, and teams that might be slightly better than them or teams that they might be slightly better than. But I think if we're putting it in the context of the Big Ten especially, Ohio State's just a leg up from everyone now. And it sucks to say because it's a lot more fun to watch conferences when you're not a fan of any teams in the conferences when they're close matchups. But I think Ohio State, Ryan Day just has this team in such a good spot. Ryan Day is one of the best coaches in all of college football right now. And Ohio State, especially recruiting, you look at what they just did in their recruiting class, taking 5 of the best 10 guys in the nation. This Ohio State team is only going to get better the next 4 or 5 years down the road, whatever you want to call it. Ohio State is a powerhouse in college football. We all know that. So how they're going to do this season? We all know that they lose the guy behind me, Justin Fields. Thank you for sending him to Chicago. He will do well with us. I cannot wait for Justin Fields. At quarterback, you're either going to have Jack Miller or CJ Stroud as the guy. In my opinion, it doesn't really matter. I still think Ohio State's going to have a top 2 quarterback in the Big Ten no matter what. Look at the rushing game. You obviously lose Trey Sermon, who had a breakout game, a monster game in the Big Ten Championship, rushing for over 300 yards in that game. He was unstoppable that game, but Master Teague is still at Ohio State. Let's not forget that. And he is a huge piece of success that Ohio State has had the last couple seasons. So do not forget about him. We could talk about the best wide receiving core in the nation, 110%, because ever since Alabama's 4 guys, I think that this is the only wide receiver core that even matches up with them in any sense. When you have Chris Olave, you have Garrett Wilson, you have Jackson Smith-Njigba, you have Julian Fleming. Obviously, Jameson Williams does transfer to Alabama, but I still think Ohio State clearly has the best wide receiving core in the nation. Just this Ohio State offense is going to pick up right where it left off, be just as productive. You do lose Justin Fields, who, don't get me wrong, once in a generation type of player that you're going to get out of Ohio State, but this offense isn't going to slow down. Ryan Day is still going to have this team right where it left off. And you look at defensively, even though you do lose guys like Shaun Wade in the secondary, you do lose some talented guys. You still have guys like Haskell Garrett on the defensive line. You still have guys like Sevyn Banks. You still have guys like Josh Proctor. I think this defense is going to be no different than what it was last year. And obviously, this is an Indianapolis-bound team. I don't see anyone right now in the Big Ten East threatening for that number 1 spot. I just think that Ohio State is in such a successful position right now for them to finish out number 1 in the Big Ten East. So that is where I'm going. Ohio State is my number 1 team in the Big Ten East. Finishing up with my number 1 team in the Big Ten West, I had the Wisconsin Badgers. Now, Wisconsin last season didn't do all that good because I think a lot of it has to do with COVID. This team finished out 4-3 with a Duke's Mayo Bowl win against the Wake Forest Demon Deacons to finish off the season. But overall, Wisconsin was disappointing last season. We could say all that stuff about how they didn't perform the best last season, especially offensively, but I think you're looking at a new offense this season, especially looking at Graham Mertz. I think if you give Graham Mertz a whole season to prepare, a COVID-less season, so shall we call it, I think Wisconsin will have a great season this year. Obviously, him passing to guys like Danny Davis, you'll have him at wide receiver. You will have guys like Kendrick Pryor. And of course, Jake Ferguson is going to be the big guy at tight end. Their leading receiver from last season coming back, which will be huge for him. And I think overall, if we talk about this defense, yeah, the offense finished out about 9th in the Big Ten in scoring last season. Wasn't anything special last season, but you talk about this defense, I think the defense is just going to pick up right where they left off if we want to talk about this linebacking core with guys like Chanel, with guys like Sanborn, with guys like Burks. I think they're going to have the best linebacking core in the Big Ten, 110%, and one of the best in all the country. Wisconsin always has amazing linebackers, and this season is no exception to that. This defense only gave up around 17.4 points last season, and you match that with some of the best in all the Big Ten, and I think this defense isn't going anywhere. Give the Wisconsin Badgers a full season without COVID and everything like that to rebuild this offense and hopefully get it to a better standard than what they were last year. I think this defense is just going to be even better than they were last year, and for those reasons, I have Wisconsin as my number 1 team in the Big Ten West. So that is my video for today, guys. I appreciate you guys so much for tuning in. I know this was a long one. This was a long one for me to make, hours and hours and hours of me doing research and talking, multiple takes and everything like that. I actually filmed this last night and got halfway through and realized I didn't record it with any volume or I didn't plug my microphone in, so that was unfortunate. So it'd mean a lot to me if you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, comment anything, comment your rankings in the Big Ten, comment anything that you have to say about any team. Thanks for watching, and definitely come back next time.